She was 8 months pregnant, both hands raised, registration in her fingers, when the voltage hit her. Tiana Booker, beloved, brilliant, 8 months along, dropped onto the sun-baked asphalt of Route 9 like a marionette with cut strings, her green maternity blouse bunching against the ground, her blue jeans scraping the concrete, her body seizing while afternoon light blazed overhead, and the dashcam of every car behind her recorded every second. Officer Dale Morrison, short-sleeved uniform crisp, mirrored sunglasses catching the noon glare, actually laughed, into his radio as bystanders screamed his name. He had no idea that 3 cars back, a woman with a federal badge and a running dashcam had already stepped out of her vehicle, and that within 72 hours, his name would be spoken on the floor of the state capitol. Before we continue, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you cannot miss. Welcome to Frost Folk Tales. This is where we tell the stories of those who were underestimated, dismissed, and targeted, yet chose courage over silence. If these stories move you, subscribe and be part of a community that refuses to let them fade into the background. The Tuesday started the way all good Tuesdays did for Tiana Booker. She had woken at 6:15, eaten a bowl of oatmeal with sliced bananas at the kitchen counter, while Marcus kissed her forehead and called her beautiful, and arrived at Hargrove County High School with 20 minutes to spare before first period. She taught 4 classes that morning, a unit on the civil rights movement, a discussion on the Reconstruction era that made 2 of her juniors stay after the bell, just to keep talking. She was the kind of teacher whose classroom felt like the one place in the building where the past was not dead and distant but alive, urgent, and entirely relevant to the lives sitting in those plastic chairs. Her students knew she was pregnant. They had started calling the baby Cassia, a name Tiana and Marcus had shared with the class one afternoon when a student asked if they had picked one yet. By the end of the semester, her first period class had made a paper banner that read "Welcome Cassia" and hung it over the whiteboard where it had stayed, slightly crooked, ever since. At 12:41 p.m. on the last Tuesday of late August, Tiana signed out at the front office, waved to her principal Nadine Fowler, and walked into a wall of afternoon heat so thick it pressed against her like a second skin. She was wearing a green maternity blouse, loose, printed cotton that caught the faintest breeze, and blue jeans cuffed at the ankle. She drove a silver Honda CR-V, the kind of car chosen specifically for its high seat and easy entry because at 32 years old and 8 months pregnant, getting in and out of low vehicles had become its own small negotiation. The drive home from Hargrove County High to the house on Millbrook Lane took 11 minutes on a normal day. She had music on low. She was thinking about Kazia's nursery. She was thinking about a student who had stayed to ask if the Voting Rights Act still actually mattered. She had smiled at the question and told him to sit down because that answer deserved time. Route 9 was a wide 2-lane stretch of state road running parallel to the business district, lined on both sides with overhead light stanchions that blazed under direct August sun with the kind of total, shadowless luminosity that made every detail razor sharp. The sky was a flat, saturated blue. The asphalt shimmered at the edges. Tiana was traveling at 31 miles per hour, one hand on the wheel, when she saw the lights in her rearview mirror, red and blue strobe, cutting clean through the afternoon brightness behind her. She pulled over promptly. There was no hesitation, no debate. She eased the CR-V onto the shoulder, rolled the window down, cut the engine, and reached immediately for her purse on the passenger seat to locate her license. She was composed because there was nothing to be alarmed about. A broken taillight, perhaps. A registration sticker she had forgotten to update. Small things, fixable things. She placed both hands visible on the steering wheel and waited. Officer Dale Morrison appeared at her window in under 30 seconds. He was thickly built, somewhere in his mid-40s, his short-sleeved uniform shirt pressed flat against his arms in the heat. His mirrored sunglasses threw her own reflection back at her, distorted, miniaturized. He stood slightly behind the doorframe rather than directly at the window, the way officers sometimes do to maintain a positional advantage, and he said nothing for a beat longer than felt natural. "License and registration," he said. Not a greeting, not an acknowledgement. A command dropped into the air between them without eye contact. "Of course," Tiana said. Her voice was warm and unhurried. "My registration is in my glove compartment. Let me just step out of the vehicle." She paused. "I'm sorry," I said. "Step out now." Tiana Booker was 8 months pregnant. She looked directly at him and kept her voice level. "Officer, I am pregnant. I am reaching for my registration in the glove box. Both my hands are visible. I'd like to get my documents for you. I'm not going to ask you again." His voice had dropped a register, not louder but colder, the way a temperature drops before a storm. Out of the vehicle. Now. She reached slowly and deliberately, both hands visible, the way every safety conversation had ever instructed, and her fingertips touched the latch of the glove compartment. The document was right there. The registration was right there. She could see the edge of the folded paper. Dale Morrison yanked the door open. There is a moment in a crisis, those who have survived them say, when time does not slow down as people expect. Instead, it becomes excessively detailed. Every sensation sharpens into high definition, while sequence collapses into a single overwhelming now. For Tiana Booker, it was the sudden rush of outside heat as the door swung open, the registration still between her fingers, and then the flat, mechanical click of the taser being deployed. A sound she had never heard before in her life, but understood instantly and completely. And then 50,000 volts of electrical current seized every muscle in her body simultaneously. She did not fall so much as become suddenly absent from the seat. The current made the choice. Her body hit the shoulder of Route 9 on her side, her green maternity blouse grinding against sunlit asphalt, her blue jeans tearing at the knee, and for several seconds that the dashcam would later record in devastating, time-stamped clarity, Tiana Booker lay in the full blaze of a Tuesday afternoon in August, convulsing on the ground while her unborn daughter moved inside her, and the white paper of the vehicle registration fluttered in the hot air beside her, like a flag of absolute surrender. Bystanders screamed. A woman in a red pickup, 3 cars back, threw open her door before her vehicle had fully stopped. A teenager on the sidewalk dropped his phone, picked it up, and pressed record. A man in a work van slammed his horn once and then went completely silent. The way people go silent when they have witnessed something their mind refuses to immediately classify. Dale Morrison stood above Tiana Booker with the taser still in his hand. He was not kneeling. He was not calling for medical assistance. He was lifting his radio with his other hand, and into it, in a tone that carried the distinct casual satisfaction of a man concluding a minor errand, he laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not the fractured sound of someone processing an adrenaline spike. A laugh the way a person laughs when they tell a joke at a cookout. Short, genuine, self-congratulatory. Several witnesses would later describe it identically, without collaboration, in separate statements, to separate investigators. Route 9 held its breath. The overhead sun did not dim. The sky did not shift. The afternoon continued around this moment with total indifference. Cars still moved at the edges. Traffic lights still cycled through their colors. The birds in the line of trees at the shoulder did not stop their noise. The world did not pause for Tiana Booker lying on the asphalt with her hands still partially raised, her fingers still curved around the crumpled edge of a registration form, her belly pressed against the concrete of a public road in full afternoon light. But 3 cars back, in a personal gray sedan with a dashcam mounted behind the rearview mirror and capturing every second of the shoulder ahead, with a timestamp watermark in the upper right corner. A woman sat very still for exactly 4 seconds. She was mid-40s, composed in a green blazer and khaki slacks, dark hair pulled back cleanly. Her eyes had not left the scene from the moment the patrol car lights had appeared. She had watched the window exchange. She had watched the door yanked open. She had watched Tiana Booker fall. For 4 seconds, she sat perfectly still. Then her right hand moved to the center console. Her fingers closed around a leather billfold, worn at the edges from years of use, and she opened it. Inside, behind a laminate shield, was a badge, gold and formal and carrying the full legal weight of the state of the capital. Below the badge number was the designation that made it carry different weight than a city shield or a county shield. State Attorney General Marisol Reyes stepped out of her vehicle. She moved with the measured, unhurried pace of someone who has made irrevocable decisions before and has learned that urgency is not the same as speed. Her green blazer caught the sun as she stepped clear of the door, badge held at chest height in her extended right hand. She moved through the frozen tableau of Route 9, past the red pickup, past the open car door, past the teenager's phone, with her eyes fixed on the short-sleeved figure still standing over the fallen woman on the ground. Dale Morrison still had his back to her. He was still speaking into his radio, still laughing, low now, a private sort of satisfaction. He had not yet turned around. He did not know that 11 steps behind him stood a woman with the authority to end every component of the life he had built inside a badge and a uniform. He did not know that the dashcam behind him had been recording since before his patrol lights ever came on. He did not know that in 72 hours, the word pattern would be written in a legal pad in block letters under overhead fluorescent light, and that word would become the architecture of his undoing. CVs, when they sue, the buddy seat sign, re-sign, one of the most morty or sign, when they sue, Krivi more idi seat sign, Krivi sue, only sue, Krivi more idi seat sign. It was the kind of laugh that didn't belong to the moment. Loose, almost bored. The sound a man makes when he has never once been held accountable for anything. Officer Dale Morrison was standing over Tiana Booker's collapsed body with his radio raised, his short-sleeved uniform crisp in the August noon light. And he was laughing. That was the detail that would stay with Marisol Reyes for years. Not the taser, not the fall, the laugh. She had her AG badge in her left hand before her car door fully closed behind her. The sun was directly overhead, blazing and indifferent, bleaching the asphalt of Route 9 to the color of old bone. Bystanders stood frozen on both shoulders of the road. 7, maybe 8 people. Phones raised, arms locked, faces unreadable behind their screens. No one had moved toward Tiana Booker. They were all waiting for permission from a world that had never given them any. Marisol Reyes walked forward through the tableau in her green blazer and khaki slacks, her low heels clicking against the road, her jaw set like a door that had just been bolted shut. Dale Morrison heard the footsteps and turned, still half smiling. The smile lasted approximately 3 seconds. "Officer," her voice carried like a bell struck in an empty cathedral. She held her badge at eye level. "Marisol Reyes, State Attorney General. Step away from the victim and do not touch anything else on this scene." The radio dropped slightly in his hand. The laugh evaporated. For one suspended instant, Dale Morrison's face cycled through something complicated. Confusion, then irritation, then a very specific brand of calculation that Marisol Reyes had seen in courtrooms and precincts and backroom meetings for 20 years. He was already building a story. She could see it happening behind his mirrored sunglasses like furniture being rearranged in a room before company arrived. His partner, Officer Kevin Sloan, was standing beside the patrol car's open door. He went absolutely still, one hand resting on the doorframe, the other hanging at his side. He looked younger than she expected. He looked like he wanted to disappear into the asphalt. "Ma'am, this is an active Dale Morrison," began. "It is not, ma'am. It is Attorney General Reyes." She had already pulled out her personal cell phone and was dialing. And I said, "Step away." He stepped away. She was already speaking into her phone. "This is Marisol Reyes, State Attorney General, badge number A4714. I need EMS dispatched immediately to Route 9 eastbound, approximately 3/10 of a mile past the Crossfield Road intersection. I have a pregnant woman down, 8 months gestation. She has been tased. I need EMS. I need a supervisor unit that is not from the Hargrove County Patrol Division currently on scene. And I need you to note that I am an eyewitness to this incident and that this call is being time-stamped as of," she checked her watch, "12:53 p.m. She did not wait for the dispatcher to finish her acknowledgement before she lowered the phone and knelt. The asphalt was punishing. It had been absorbing sunlight since 6 in the morning, and it radiated heat upward through Marisol Reyes's slacks as she went down on one knee beside Tiana Booker. Up close, the picture was worse. Tiana Booker was on her side, one arm tucked beneath her, the other outstretched across the road with her palm facing upward, the same palm she had raised to show she was unarmed. Her green maternity blouse had ridden up slightly at the fall. Her eyes were half open, unfocused, her breathing shallow and irregular. Her belly rose and fell with each breath, and Marisol Reyes fixed her eyes on that rising and falling, and would not look away from it. She took Tiana Booker's outstretched hand in both of hers. "Tiana, my name is Marisol. I'm here. I have called for help, and it is coming. You are not alone." She kept her voice level and warm, the tone she used when speaking to witnesses who had been shattered and needed to be gathered back piece by piece. "I need you to stay with me. EMS is coming. Your baby is going to be okay. I need you to hear my voice and stay with me." Tiana Booker's fingers moved, the smallest possible motion, but they moved. One of the bystanders, a heavy-set man in an orange shirt and blue jeans standing on the grassy shoulder, lowered his phone and called out, "Is she gonna be all right?" His voice cracked on the last word. "We're going to take care of her," Marisol Reyes said without looking up. Behind her, she was aware of Dale Morrison in her peripheral vision, not moving, not speaking, hands at his sides, the radio still loose in his grip. Kevin Sloan had not moved from the patrol car. Good. She had not yet decided what she was going to do about Kevin Sloan. That would come later, in an office with better lighting and a legal pad, and time to be precise. Her assistant's number was already ringing when she brought the phone back to her ear. "Daniela, I need you to find a number for Marcus Booker, football coach, Hargrove County High School. It is urgent. Tell him his wife has been injured on Route 9 and she is being taken to Hargrove General. Tell him to go directly to the emergency entrance. Do not use the word tased. He will find out at the hospital. Just get him moving now." She set the phone down and went back to holding Tiana Booker's hand. Marcus Booker was 2 miles away on a practice field when the call came in. He was mid-drill, whistle around his neck, clipboard under his arm, watching his defensive line run a tackling pattern in the flat afternoon sun, when his phone rang with an unfamiliar number and a woman's voice told him his wife had been injured, that she needed him at Hargrove General's emergency entrance right now. His clipboard hit the grass before she finished speaking. The players nearest him said he went the color of ash. He was in his car before the assistant coaches fully understood what had happened. He drove with both hands locked on the wheel and did not remember a single moment of those 2 miles. The EMS unit arrived on Route 9 at 1:04 p.m. Marisol Reyes stepped aside precisely enough to give the paramedics room, and not 1 inch more. She listened to every exchange, watching their hands, watching their eyes, watching the fetal monitor leads they pressed against Tiana Booker's belly, with an efficiency that made her simultaneously grateful and terrified. She noted the paramedic's expression when he heard the fetal readout. He controlled it quickly. She filed that expression away. Lieutenant Conrad Tillman arrived 4 minutes after EMS, his patrol cruiser pulling up hard on the shoulder, his door opening before the vehicle fully stopped. He was a wide man in his 50s, in a long-sleeved uniform that was too heavy for August, and he walked toward the scene with the confident stride of a man accustomed to arriving and immediately becoming the most important person present. He made it approximately 15 feet before Marisol Reyes intercepted him. "Lieutenant." She held her badge again, though she suspected he already knew exactly who she was. This scene is under AG jurisdiction as of 12:53 p.m. Officer Morrison's dashcam unit and any corresponding in-car recording equipment will be retained and transferred directly to my office, not to your department's evidence locker, not to internal affairs. To me today, before this scene is cleared. Tillman's jaw worked. Attorney General, with respect. Departmental protocol requires that all— I know what departmental protocol requires, Lieutenant, and I also know what State Statute 44B governing independent AG jurisdiction over active civil rights investigations requires. If you would like to test which one supersedes the other, you are welcome to make that argument from the wrong side of an obstruction charge. She held his gaze without blinking. The dashcam unit. Today, Conrad Tillman stared at her for 4 seconds. Then he looked past her at Dale Morrison, who was standing in the sun looking at no one in particular, and something crossed Tillman's face that was almost recognition, the look of a man watching a situation escape from him in real time. He gave the order for the dashcam unit to be transferred. Later, people would ask Marisol Reyes whether she had known, standing on that road, that Route 9 would become the center of the biggest prosecution of her career. She would answer carefully, the way she always answered careful questions. But the truth was simpler than her careful answers. 14 years ago, she had run for state attorney general on one platform with one promise, that the machinery of institutional protection that had swallowed complaint after complaint, family after family, decade after decade, would not swallow another. She had spent those 14 years building the legal architecture to make that promise real. The precedents, the statutes, the team, the methods. She had been waiting for a case clean enough in its brutality and documented enough in its evidence to carry the full weight of everything she had built. She had not wished for it. She had simply been ready for it. The gurney carrying Tiana Booker rolled past her at 1:17 p.m. Paramedics moving at a controlled pace that communicated urgency without alarm. Tiana Booker's eyes were closed. The overhead August sun caught the silver of the EMS equipment and threw it back in sharp, hard light. Marisol Reyes watched the gurney until it reached the ambulance doors. She turned back to the scene. The silver CRV still sitting at the roadside, its door still open. Tiana Booker's registration still on the passenger seat where she had been reaching for it when Dale Morrison yanked the door away. She looked at that open door for a long moment. Then she took out her legal pad and began to write. At Hargrove General, Dr. Fatima Osei met the gurney at the emergency bay doors, her team already gloved, already moving. She pressed 2 fingers against Tiana Booker's wrist, looked at the fetal monitor readout the paramedics handed her, and called the level of response in a voice that left no room for anything but urgency. They moved Tiana Booker through the corridor, under the hard, even fluorescent light of the emergency wing, and Dr. Osei was already issuing instructions before they cleared the bay doors. The fetal heartbeat was there. It was irregular. It was fighting, but it was there. And in a hospital waiting room that smelled of antiseptic and recycled air, Marcus Booker arrived through the sliding glass doors of the emergency entrance in his orange coaching shirt and blue jacket, his whistle still around his neck, and he sat down in a plastic chair and pressed both hands over his face and made a sound that no one in that waiting room forgot. The fluorescent lights of Hargrove County General burned without mercy. over everything they touched. The white tile floors, the pale green walls, the faces of people who had run out of things to say. It was the kind of light that erased shadows and, in doing so, erased the comfort that shadows sometimes carry. Marcus Booker had been sitting in the same chair for 3 hours and 14 minutes. He knew, because he had been watching the clock above the nurse's station with the intensity of a man who had nothing left to do but count. His orange coaching shirt was still damp at the collar. His blue jacket was zipped to the sternum despite the warmth of the waiting room. His hands rested on his knees, and he did not move them. Somewhere behind those double doors, his wife and his daughter were fighting for their lives. That was the sentence that kept arranging and rearranging itself inside his chest like broken furniture. Dr. Fatima Osei had not slept. She had been on a 12-hour shift when Tiana Booker was wheeled through the ER bay, and she had not left the floor since. She was the head of OB trauma at Hargrove County General, and she had seen taser cases before. Never like this, never on a woman 8 months along, never with fetal monitoring spiking the way Kezia's was spiking. The taser had sent 50,000 volts through Tiana Booker's body in a 2-second cycle, and Tiana Booker's heart, a 32-year-old heart that had never given anyone a moment of trouble, was now firing in an irregular rhythm that required continuous monitoring and a medication drip she had started the moment Tiana arrived. The bruised ribs from the fall onto the asphalt were secondary concern. The arrhythmia was the clock they were racing. Kezia was the reason the clock mattered. Dr. Osei stood at the foot of Tiana Booker's bed and read the fetal monitor printout the way a scholar reads a language she has spent years learning. The lines were not where she needed them. They were not catastrophic, not yet, but they were insistent, and they demanded things from her that exhaustion had no right to interrupt. She adjusted the dosage. She spoke quietly to her resident. She did not sit down. At 2:19 in the morning, Sunita Krishnan arrived. She was Marisol Reyes' chief investigative counsel, and she moved through the hospital corridor in a green blazer over a crisp white blouse and dark slacks with the unhurried precision of someone who understood that urgency and composure were not opposites. They were the same thing, wearing different faces. She carried a leather document case and a small voice recorder, and the specific kind of focused calm that comes from having spent a decade inside rooms where terrible things had happened, and someone had tried very hard to make sure no one ever officially knew about them. She found Marcus Booker in the waiting room and introduced herself quietly. He looked up at her with eyes that were dry only because he had passed through weeping and come out the other side of it into something quieter and more frightening. She sat beside him rather than across from him. She told him who she was and what she was there to do. She told him that Marisol Reyes was not going home, and that this case was already formally opened, and that every piece of evidence from the scene had been secured before the Hargrove County PD had an opportunity to touch it. She told him this not to comfort him, but because he deserved to know the truth of what was happening. Marcus Booker listened to all of it, and then he said one thing. He said, "She had her hands up." Sunita Krishnan opened her document case and said, "I know. I've seen the footage. I need you to tell me everything." He told her everything. Outside, beyond the glass doors of the hospital entrance, the night was beginning to loosen at its edges. The sky over Hargrove County was still dark, but was carrying, somewhere in its eastern corner, the first gray suggestion of morning. Reverend Elijah Brantley had been making phone calls since 11 o'clock the previous night, and the results of those calls were now arriving in ones and twos and then in groups. Members of his congregation, parents from the school, people who had seen the video and could not sleep. They brought candles and folding chairs and thermoses of coffee, and the kind of quiet, furious solidarity that does not need to be organized because it organizes itself. By 5 a.m., there were 60 people on the sidewalk outside Hargrove County General, standing in the blue pre-dawn light, and Reverend Brantley stood among them in his blue jacket with a candle in his hand. And he was not preaching, because this was not a moment for preaching. This was a moment for standing. So they stood. The bystander videos had gone viral overnight. All three of them. The one from the silver pickup 2 lanes over had the clearest angle. You could see Tiana Booker's hands plainly, both of them raised and open. And you could see Dale Morrison's arm come up and extend, and you could see the wire from the taser connecting the two of them like something out of a nightmare. And you could see Tiana Booker go down. That video had been shared 200,000 times by midnight. By the time the sun cleared the Hargrove County Hospital roof, that number had tripled. The Hargrove County Police Department issued its press statement at 6:47 a.m., and someone in Marisol Reyes' office sent Sunita Krishnan a copy before the ink was dry. Sunita read it, standing in the hospital corridor under the overhead fluorescent panels, and felt the particular chill that comes not from cold, but from the recognition of something deliberately, methodically false. The statement described the traffic stop as routine. It described Dale Morrison's response as a necessary de-escalation measure in response to a non-compliant subject. It used the phrase officer safety twice. It did not use the word pregnant. It did not use the name Tiana Booker. It referred to her as the individual throughout. The gaslighting was not subtle because it did not need to be. It only needed to be official, and it was. Sunita Krishnan photographed the statement and sent it to Marisol Reyes with a single accompanying sentence. "They've started." Marisol Reyes, who had gone home for 4 hours and was already back at her office in the state capitol building with the overhead lights on and her green blazer on the back of her chair, read the message and sent back 2 words: "Good document." Nadine Fowler arrived at the hospital at 7:15 a.m. in a tan coat over an orange blouse and navy trousers, carrying a large manila envelope that she held with both hands as though it was something fragile. She was Tiana Booker's principal at Hargrove County High School, and she had been awake all night, and it showed in the lines around her eyes, but her posture was straight and her chin was level, and she asked the nurse at the front desk in a voice that did not invite argument which waiting room Marcus Booker was in. They told her, and she went there, and she sat down beside him and placed the envelope on his knee without a word. He looked at it. She said, "Every student in her first period class signed it. Some of them wrote notes inside. I want her to have it when she wakes up." Marcus Booker put his hand over the envelope and stared at it for a long moment. Then he said, "She's going to wake up." It was not a question. Nadine Fowler said, "I know she is." They sat together in the fluorescent light with the envelope between them and the clock above the nurse's station, still marking time. It was Sunita Krishnan who received the personnel file. She did not know who sent it. The email came from an address that resolved to nothing, and the attachment was a scanned PDF with the header of the Hargrove County Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. She opened it on her laptop in the hospital cafeteria, her green blazer on, a cup of untouched coffee beside her, the overhead fluorescents throwing clean white light across the table. She read it once quickly, and then she read it again slowly, and by the second reading her jaw was set in a way that the people who knew her well would have recognized immediately as the look she wore when the thing she had suspected was confirmed. Dale Morrison had 2 prior use of force complaints on record. The first was from 3 years ago. A black man named Terrence Okafor, 38, stopped for a broken headlight, tased on the shoulder of Route 14 when he reached into his back seat for his insurance card. The second was from 18 months ago. A black woman named Claudette Marsh, 51, tased in a grocery store parking lot during a verbal dispute over a fender bender. Both complaints had been reviewed. Both had been dismissed. Both dismissals carried the signature of Lieutenant Conrad Tillman. Sunita Krishnan closed the file, opened a fresh document, and began typing. The word count at the bottom of the screen climbed steadily in the quiet of the cafeteria, and the fluorescent light hummed overhead. And outside the window the sun was fully up now, burning clean and high over Hargrove County. and the 60 people in front of the hospital had become 112. At 8:53 a.m., the nurse came to find Marcus Booker. He stood so fast, the chair scraped back 3 feet across the tile. He followed her through the double doors, through the corridor, and into the room where Tiana Booker lay in the bed, with the monitors and the IV and the fetal heart rate still printing its unsteady line on the machine beside her. The room smelled of antiseptic and recycled air. The overhead lights made everything precise and unforgiving. Tiana Booker's eyes were open. They were heavy and unfocused, and then, in the seconds that Marcus Booker crossed the room toward her, they found him, and something in her face settled. Her right hand moved first, not toward him, but downward, pressing against the curve of her belly, pressing against Kezia, pressing with the instinct of a woman who had been unconscious and was now back and needed to account for the one thing that mattered most. Her voice was barely there, dry and thin and terrified and steady all at once. She said, "Is she okay?" Dr. Fatima Ose stepped to the side of the bed. She looked at Tiana Booker with the full weight of honesty that the moment required. She said, "She is still fighting." Tiana Booker's hand pressed harder against her belly. Her eyes closed. Marcus Booker took her other hand in both of his and held it, and neither of them said another word, and the fetal monitor kept printing its line, and outside on the sidewalk, the candles were still burning in the morning sun. The conference room on the 3rd floor of Hargrove County Police Department headquarters had no windows. That was by design. Lieutenant Conrad Tillman had chosen it specifically, a rectangular box of beige walls and recycled air, fluorescent tubes buzzing overhead at a frequency that made prolonged conversation feel slightly unreal. He liked that effect. It made people more pliable. He sat at the head of the table in his pressed uniform, silver bars gleaming, both hands flat on the surface, as though he owned every inch of what lay beneath them. Dale Morrison sat across from him in civilian clothes, a green polo shirt and dark jeans, his mirrored sunglasses for once not on his face, his eyes smaller and harder than most people expected. He looked less like a man processing guilt and more like a man calculating costs. Beside him sat Clifford Raines, the department's favored outside counsel, a trim man in his early 50s wearing a charcoal blazer over a pale blue button-down, a yellow legal pad open in front of him, his pen already moving. "The word we use," Tillman said, "is non-compliant. Every single time, we don't elaborate, we don't speculate. We say the officer followed standard protocol in response to a non-compliant subject who refused repeated lawful commands." He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice in rooms like this. That was the performance of a man who needed to. Conrad Tillman had spent 22 years learning that real authority was delivered at a murmur. Clifford Raines nodded without looking up from his yellow pad. "The key is consistency. Every statement, every filing, every interview, the same language, in the same order. Deviation is what prosecutors feed on. We don't deviate." He tapped his pen against the table twice. "Dale, that includes your personal communications. Nothing goes to anyone until it goes through me first." Dale Morrison leaned back in his chair. "I've got nothing to hide. She came at me." "No," Tillman said quietly, cutting him off with one syllable so flat it had the effect of a door slamming. "She was non-compliant. That's all she was. That's all she will ever be in any document that carries your name." He held eye contact until Morrison looked away. Then he straightened a paper in front of him that did not need straightening. "Internal Affairs has already opened the review. My guys, it'll be thorough and it'll take the time it takes. In the meantime, we get ahead of the record." What getting ahead of the record meant became clear within 48 hours. Hargrove County PD's Internal Affairs Unit submitted formal information requests to two separate parties, one to the school district for Tiana Booker's complete professional personnel file including any disciplinary records, and one to the social media monitoring firm the department kept on retainer, ordering a full scrape of Tiana Booker's public and semi-public online presence going back 4 years. They were looking for something, anything, a sharp comment, a political post, a photograph that could be made to tell a different story. They were not investigating what had happened on Route 9. They were building a wall of noise around the woman lying in a hospital bed, hoping the noise would muffle what the cameras had already recorded. Sunita Krishnan got the tip at 7:22 in the morning from a source inside the district office who recognized the information request for what it was. She read it twice, forwarded it to a secure channel, and was in Marisol Reyes's office by 8 o'clock. Marisol Reyes stood at her desk when Sunita handed her the document, standing because she had not yet sat down, because she had been in the building since 6 and had not stopped moving. She wore her green blazer over a white blouse and black slacks, hair pinned back, reading glasses on. She read the request once. Then she set it on her desk, removed her glasses, and pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of her nose for exactly 3 seconds. That was as close as Marisol Reyes came to losing her composure in front of staff. "They're building a file on her," Sunita said, though she knew Marisol already understood that. Sometimes saying the obvious thing out loud was the only way to fully register its obscenity. "Schedule a press conference," Marisol said. "State Capitol Corridor, Main Hall. Skylight end. I want maximum natural light. 2 hours. 2 hours?" Sunita asked. "They've had 48. We've given them enough runway." She picked her reading glasses back up and was already reaching for the dashcam transcript before Sunita had finished turning toward the door. The state capitol's main corridor at midday was a cathedral of natural light. The skylights ran the full length of the arched ceiling, flooding the pale stone floors with clean, uncompromising brightness. Marisol Reyes stood at the podium with her green blazer crisp, a single folder open in front of her, and said nothing for the first 4 seconds after she stepped up, just looked at the assembled press corps until the room finished settling into silence of its own accord. She did not open with outrage. She opened with facts. She stated the date, the time, and the location. She stated Tiana Booker's age, her occupation, her gestational week. She stated that Tiana Booker had both hands visible at the time Officer Dale Morrison deployed his taser, and she cited the timestamp on the dashcam footage to the second. She said the department's characterization of the incident as a necessary de-escalation measure was inconsistent with the footage, inconsistent with witness testimony, and inconsistent with the definition of de-escalation as it appeared in the Hargrove County PD's own use of force policy manual, which she then cited by section number. Then she opened the folder and said she would like to read from the dashcam transcript directly. She read it straight through without editorial comment. Morrison's commands overlapping Tiana Booker's explanations, the sound of the door being yanked open, the taser discharge, Tiana Booker's voice cutting off mid-word, the bystanders screaming from the sidewalk. The reporters stopped typing. Several of them went very still, the way people go still when they are not sure where to put what they are feeling. Then she reached the line where Dale Morrison keyed his radio. She read it exactly as it appeared in the transcript, in the same measured tone she had used for every line before it. The laugh, the words after. She closed the folder. "The State Attorney General's office is opening a formal investigation into the conduct of Officer Dale Morrison, into the departmental review process being conducted by Lieutenant Conrad Tillman's Internal Affairs Unit, and into the information requests submitted this morning against the victim, Tiana Booker." She paused. "A woman who is currently in a hospital bed while her unborn daughter undergoes fetal monitoring will not have her social media history weaponized against her under my watch. I want that to be understood." She took 2 questions and left the podium. By afternoon, Dale Morrison had been placed on paid administrative leave, not terminated, paid. The department's statement used the word pending 6 times in 4 sentences, a grammatical fog machine generating the impression of process while promising nothing. Outside Hargrove County PD headquarters, the first protesters arrived within the hour, a cluster of 20 that grew to over 100 by evening, standing on the wide concrete plaza under a blazing late August sun, signs held overhead, chanting into the open air. Inside St. Raphael Medical Center, Marcus Booker had not gone home in 2 days. He sat for a television interview in the hospital's family consultation room, overhead fluorescent light steady above him, wearing his blue jacket over his orange coaching shirt, the fabric still carrying the faint smell of cut grass from the practice field. His large hands were folded on the table in front of him. He spoke slowly, in the deliberate way of a man who has decided that if he speaks slowly enough he will not break. He described what it had felt like to be on the football field when his phone rang. He described seeing an unknown number and almost not answering. He described hearing the words "your wife" and "taser" and "hospital" in a sequence that his brain had refused for several seconds to assemble into meaning. He said he had sat down on the field without deciding to sit down. He said one of his players, a 16-year-old junior named Deshaun, had put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Coach, you gotta go." And that in that moment, a teenager had been steadier than he was. He said Tiana had been talking to him that morning about what color to paint the nursery. He said she had wanted a warm yellow. His voice held through all of it until the word yellow, and then it did not hold quite as well, and he looked down at his folded hands for a moment before looking back up. The interview ran in full on 3 local stations and was clipped and reshared across every platform by nightfall. At 11:43 p.m., Marisol Reyes was alone in her office. The overhead fluorescent hummed its thin, consistent note above her. Her green blazer was draped over the back of her chair. On her laptop screen, the clearest bystander video played again, the same 9 seconds she had now watched 27 times. She was not watching Morrison. She had stopped watching Morrison several viewings ago. She was watching Tiana Booker's hands, both of them, open, raised to approximately shoulder height, fingers spread, the universal grammar of "I am not a threat," the posture that should have ended everything before anything began. She paused the video on that frame. The room was very quiet. Outside the Capitol building, the city moved through its ordinary nocturnal rhythms, indifferent and continuous. In a hospital 2 miles away, a woman and her unborn daughter were fighting toward morning. In a windowless conference room in her memory, Conrad Tillman's voice murmured its flat instructions into the recycled air. Marisol Reyes pulled her yellow legal pad toward her. She uncapped her pen. She looked at the paused image of Tiana Booker's raised hands, the noon sun blazing behind them like a kind of terrible irony, and she wrote one word: pattern. She underlined it once. Then she set down the pen, looked at what she had written, and left it there on the page like the beginning of an indictment, which in every way that mattered it was. The subpoena arrived at Hargrove County Police Department headquarters on a Wednesday morning, delivered by a state courier in a blue jacket who required a signature and offered no small talk. Inside that thick manila envelope was a legal instrument that gave Marisol Reyes's office access to every use of force report, every internal affairs record, every disciplinary file, and every cleared complaint the department had generated over the past 7 years. Lieutenant Conrad Tillman signed for it himself. According to Sunita Krishnan, who was told this detail by a clerk at the front desk, Tillman read the cover page twice, set it on his desk, and did not speak for nearly 3 minutes. He should have been afraid sooner. Sunita Krishnan assembled a team of 4 investigators and 2 forensic data analysts and set up a war room inside the Attorney General's regional satellite office, a bright, open-plan space with overhead fluorescent panels humming at full strength and wide windows facing east that let the morning sun pour across every surface. She worked 16-hour days. Her team worked alongside her. Box by box, file by file, the records arrived, some digital, some physical, some suspiciously incomplete in ways that Sunita Krishnan flagged immediately and cataloged as potential evidence of tampering. What they found over those 2 weeks did not shock Sunita Krishnan. She had suspected the shape of it from the moment she saw Dale Morrison's personnel file. What shocked her was the scale. Over 7 years, the Hargrove County Police Department had deployed tasers on 73 separate documented occasions. Of those 73 incidents, 61 involved black residents. That was 84%. Hargrove County's black population was 27%. 14 formal complaints had been submitted by residents or their families in connection with use of force incidents during that period. 14 complaints, 0 sustained, not one. Every single complaint had been reviewed internally, routed through the same chain of command, and cleared with language so similar from case to case that Sunita Krishnan's analysts suspected the reports were generated from a shared template. 3 officers accounted for 60% of all taser incidents. Dale Morrison was one of them. Lieutenant Conrad Tillman had personally signed the clearance document on every single one of the 14 dismissed complaints. Sunita Krishnan printed the summary spreadsheet, walked to Marisol Reyes' office, and laid it flat on her desk without a word. Marisol Reyes read it standing up. She did not sit down. She read the whole page, turned it over, read the back, and then set it down with the same deliberate stillness she brought to everything. "Schedule the legislative hearing," she said. "I want the Oversight Committee in session within 10 days. The hearing was held on a Thursday morning in the Hargrove State Capitol's main committee chamber. A large, high-ceilinged room with arched skylights that threw natural light across every row of seating. The chamber was built for 50 attendees. On that Thursday morning, it held over 200. Every seat was filled. People stood along the side walls. Reverend Elijah Brantley sat in the 3rd row of the gallery, in a deep blue jacket, his hands folded, his face composed with the particular stillness of a man who has long practiced converting rage into patience. Beside him sat families, mothers, fathers, adult children, who had filed complaints with the Hargrove County PD and watched those complaints disappear. Tiana Booker's students filled an entire section of the gallery, some of them still wearing their Hargrove County High lanyards, brought by Nadine Fowler, who sat at the end of their row in an orange top and a blue jacket, her posture impeccable. Marisol Reyes stood at the witness table in her green blazer and khaki slacks, a stack of documents to her left, a water glass to her right, and nothing in her hands. She didn't need notes. She had memorized every number. She began with the geography. She explained clearly and without editorializing what the use of force data showed about where in Hargrove County taser incidents occurred, which neighborhoods, which demographics. She walked the committee through the complaint process, how it was supposed to work under department policy, and how it had actually worked in practice. She named no names in the first 15 minutes. She let the structure of the system indict itself. Then she named the names. When she reached Dale Morrison's case history, the gallery did not make a sound. When she read aloud the clearance language from Lieutenant Conrad Tillman's signed reports, the same phrases, recycled case after case, year after year, a woman in the 2nd row of the gallery pressed her hand to her mouth. Reverend Elijah Brantley closed his eyes briefly and then opened them again. One of the committee members, a state senator in a gray suit, leaned forward and asked Marisol Reyes to confirm what she had just stated about the complaint sustain rate. 0, Marisol Reyes said. Over 7 years, 14 complaints, 0 sustained. The senator sat back. Marisol Reyes let the number live in the room for a moment. before she continued. Injustice felt is a wound. Injustice quantified is something colder and in many ways harder to absorb. It removes the possibility of dismissing any single incident as an aberration, as a bad day, as one officer's poor judgment. The spreadsheet on the committee table did not allow for aberration. It described a system. It described intention distributed across time. But a spreadsheet cannot weep. 40 miles away, in room 214 of Hargrove County General Hospital, Tiana Booker was propped up against two pillows, wearing a blue and green hospital gown, an IV line running into her left forearm. Her braids were pulled back loosely. The fetal monitor beside her bed beeped at a steady, reassuring rhythm. Kezia, that was still just a name they had chosen, a name for a child not yet born but already fiercely anticipated, was still in utero, still improving, each day of stability a small hard-won victory that Dr. Fatima Ose reported with careful optimism and Marcus Booker received with desperate gratitude. Sunita Krishnan sat across from Tiana Booker in a chair she had pulled close to the bed. Her tablet was propped on a small rolling table, recording. This was a formal witness interview for the AG's investigative record, and Sunita Krishnan had explained that clearly before she began. Tiana Booker had nodded and said she understood and that she wanted to do it. Sunita Krishnan asked her to begin from the moment she noticed the patrol car's lights in her rearview mirror. Tiana Booker's voice was quiet and even. She did not perform her composure. It was simply present, the composure of a woman who had been lying in a hospital bed for 2 weeks, choosing, deliberately, to remain coherent because coherence was the only form of power currently available to her. She described Route 9, the Tuesday noon light, the way she had pulled over immediately, put the car in park, placed her hands on the wheel. She described the sound of Officer Dale Morrison's boots on the asphalt. She described how he leaned into her window and she said, "Good afternoon, officer," and he did not respond to that. He told her to produce her license and registration. She said she would need to reach into her glove compartment. She told him she was 8 months pregnant and asked him to please bear that in mind as she moved. She said both of those things. Clearly, Sunita Krishnan asked her what Dale Morrison said in response. Tiana Booker looked directly at the tablet camera. He said, "I don't need your life story. Get out of the vehicle," she continued. She described telling him again, calmly, that she was pregnant, that she would comply fully, that she simply needed a moment. She described reaching, slowly, both hands visible, toward her center console, where she kept her registration card in a small blue folder. She described the door being yanked open. She described seeing the taser in his hand and not understanding, not believing what she was seeing, not having any framework in that sunlit afternoon moment for the reality of what was about to happen to her. And then, she said, and her voice dropped slightly but did not break, "He deployed it, and I fell." She paused for 3 seconds. "The last thing I remember before I lost consciousness was the asphalt, how hot it was. I remember thinking about Kezia. That's all I remember." Sunita Krishnan stopped the recording. She asked Tiana Booker if she needed a break. Tiana Booker shook her head and said no. She wanted to finish. They sat together in the bright hospital room, the fetal monitor keeping its steady count, and Tiana Booker's voice moved through every detail that Marisol Reyes's spreadsheets could never contain. The sound of his voice, the contempt in it, the absolute absence of hesitation. Numbers describe a pattern. A voice describes a person. The Hargrove County Police Department had spent 7 years counting on the fact that the people they harmed would remain numbers. Complaints filed, complaints cleared, incidents closed. Tiana Booker's recorded voice, steady and devastating in that hospital room, was proof that the calculation had finally failed. At 4:48 p.m. on that same Thursday, as the legislative hearing concluded and the committee members filed out of the sunlit chamber into the Capitol corridor, Marisol Reyes stood at a table in her satellite office in front of 3 members of her legal team, Sunita Krishnan beside her, and signed the criminal charging documents. Dale Morrison, aggravated assault, reckless endangerment. Lieutenant Conrad Tillman, obstruction of justice, falsification of official records. She signed each page cleanly, without pause. The pen made a small, precise sound against the paper. Sunita Krishnan gathered the documents and handed them to the courier who would file them with the state court before 5 o'clock. Marisol Reyes stood at the window for a moment. The late afternoon sun came through the glass overhead, bright and direct, falling across the documents still on the table. 7 years of cleared complaints, 73 incidents, 14 erased voices, all of it now formally, irrevocably part of a criminal record that could not be signed off on and buried. The first true catharsis of this story was not loud. It was the sound of a courier's footsteps in a corridor. It was the particular weight of a sealed envelope carried out of a room and into the machinery of consequences. 40 miles away, the fetal monitor beeped. Kezia was still fighting, so was her mother. The first cracks appeared on a Monday morning, 14 days after Tiana Booker collapsed on Route 9, and they were loud. 43 members of the Hargrove County Police Officers Union gathered in the parking lot outside Union headquarters on Morrow Street, standing in the full overhead blaze of a late August sun, holding signs that read "Morrison did his job" and "Back the badge" and "Political witch hunt." Their president, a thick-necked man named Gary Peltz in a green polo shirt and khaki trousers, stood before a cluster of microphones and announced that the union would be funding Dale Morrison's legal defense in full and that the state attorney general had launched what he called a coordinated assault on law enforcement across this state. He said the word coordinated 3 times. He never said Tiana Booker's name once. The cameras rolled. The signs waved. And 3 blocks away, inside a glass-walled conference room on the 4th floor of City Hall, 3 members of the Hargrove County City Council, Alderman Prescott, Webb, and Cofield, held their own press conference in front of a window that let in clean morning skylight and called on Marisol Reyes to recuse herself from the investigation on grounds that her personal presence at the scene made her, in their words, a compromised party with an axe to grind. Alderman Prescott wore a blue jacket and kept straightening his tie between sentences as if the cameras required it. Clifford Raines was everywhere that week. The defense attorney wore a different suit each day and seemed to genuinely enjoy the cameras. He called the AG's case political persecution dressed up as justice. He said Marisol Reyes was using a pregnant woman as a vehicle for her own ambitions. He said Dale Morrison was a decorated officer with a spotless record, a claim that Sunita Krishnan had already publicly dismantled with 2 prior use-of-force complaints and a personnel file that told a very different story. But Clifford Raines said it anyway, because saying it on camera was the only arena where evidence was not required. The online campaigns were quieter but more vicious. Anonymous accounts surfaced across 3 platforms, posting old photos of Tiana Booker from school events, twisting captions to suggest she had a history of confrontational behavior. One account posted a cropped screenshot of a text message that had nothing to do with the incident and claimed it proved she had been hostile toward authority figures. The posts were flagged, reported, and in most cases taken down within hours, but not before they spread, not before some people saw them and let them settle in. Sunita Krishnan's office began documenting each post, each account, each digital fingerprint, adding them to a file that was growing thicker every day. Tiana Booker did not see most of it. Her nurses were quietly strategic about what appeared on the television in room 214, and Marcus Booker had made a quiet agreement with Dr. Fatima Osei that anything likely to spike Tiana Booker's blood pressure stayed outside the room. But she was not naive. She had been a history teacher for 9 years. She knew what a smear campaign looked like because she had taught her students about them, had walked them through the mechanics of character destruction as a tool of institutional self-preservation. She knew that when the machine attacked the person, rather than the evidence. It was because the evidence could not be attacked. She held that knowledge like a smooth stone in her hand, turning it over quietly in the hours when Marcus Booker was down the hall getting coffee, and Dr. Fatima Ose was between rounds. Kezia moved inside her on a Tuesday afternoon, and Tiana Booker pressed her palm flat against her belly and said, very softly, "I know, I know." The march happened on a Saturday. Reverend Elijah Brantley had been organizing for 11 days with the systematic, unhurried energy of a man who understood that movements built in haste collapsed in exhaustion. He had called churches. He had called the teachers' union. He had called the parents of Tiana Booker's students, the neighbors on the street where she and Marcus Booker lived, the women from her prenatal yoga class, the congregation that had prayed for Kezia every Sunday since the incident. He had called people who did not know Tiana Booker personally, but knew what had happened on Route 9 and could not stay home. 4,200 people came. They filled Meridian Avenue from the Hargrove Public Library all the way back to the corner of 9th and Callaway, standing under a sky that was cloudless and merciless and beautiful, the overhead sun pouring straight down on a river of people, carrying signs and photos and handmade banners. Tiana, Kezia, we see you, one of ours. The kind of signs made at kitchen tables at midnight by people who could not sleep. Nadine Fowler walked in the front row beside Reverend Elijah Brantley. She wore an orange blazer over a white blouse and dark slacks, and she carried a framed photograph of Tiana Booker standing in her classroom doorway, laughing at something a student had said. 8 months pregnant and radiant and utterly unaware that the photograph would one day be carried through the streets as an act of witness. Nadine Fowler did not cry. She walked with her chin up and her shoulders back, the way she had told her own students to walk when the world tried to make them feel small. Behind her came the students, rows of them. Tiana Booker's first period class, her third period, her fifth. They carried their teacher's photo printed on paper that some of them had laminated at a drugstore copy center the night before because they wanted it to last. They had learned about the March on Washington in her classroom. They had learned about Bloody Sunday in her classroom. They had learned that history was not something that happened to other people in other centuries. It was something ordinary people made with their feet on ordinary ground. Now they were making it, and they were doing it for her. Marcus Booker could not leave the hospital. He stood in the parking lot of Hargrove General in his blue jacket, over an orange shirt, his phone in one hand, and spoke into a recorder that fed his voice through a Bluetooth speaker mounted on a pole near the front of the march. His voice came out large and unsteady and completely honest. He said, "When I got that phone call on the football field, I thought I was going to lose everything I love in 1 second. I thought I was going to lose my wife. I thought I was going to lose my daughter before she ever had a name. And I ran. I ran to my car, and I drove to that hospital. And I did not know, I genuinely did not know, if either of them was going to be alive when I got there." He paused. The crowd was silent. The sun beat down on 4,000 upturned faces. He said, "Tiana teaches her students that justice is not a gift. It is a demand. Today you are making that demand. She sees you. I see you. Kezia will know you were here." In room 214, Tiana Booker watched the march on the television that her nurses had quietly left, tuned to the local news channel. She was sitting up in her hospital bed in a blue and green hospital gown, her IV line looped carefully to one side, her hands resting on the round weight of her belly. She watched the camera sweep across the crowd and then zoom in on the students, her students, holding her face up to the August sky. She had not cried since the incident. Not once. She had been too focused, too careful, too conscious of the monitors and the fetal sensors and the thin line between composure and collapse. But now, watching her 17-year-olds march through downtown Hargrove with her photograph held above their heads like something worth defending, Something broke open quietly behind her sternum, and the tears came down her face without sound. She did not wipe them away. She let them fall. Across the state capitol, in a corner office, with overhead fluorescent lighting, and a wall of legal briefs, and a whiteboard covered in case architecture, Marisol Reyes heard about the change of venue ruling by phone. Clifford Raines had successfully argued that pretrial publicity in Hargrove County made a fair jury selection there impossible, and Judge Patricia Stoneham had granted the motion, moving the trial to the state capitol courthouse. The assistant who called with the news waited for a reaction. Marisol Reyes said, "Good." The assistant paused. "Good? I wanted the wider stage," Marisol Reyes said, and hung up. The bombshell arrived on a Thursday afternoon, delivered not with drama, but with the quiet, devastating efficiency of someone who had been trained to follow evidence wherever it refused to stop leading. Sunita Krishnan had been combing through the digital forensic records subpoenaed from Dale Morrison's department-issued phone. The records were dense and mostly unremarkable: patrol logs, dispatch confirmations, routine shift communications. But at 12:48 p.m. on the afternoon of the incident, 31 seconds after the dashcam timestamp recorded the sound of Tiana Booker hitting the asphalt, Dale Morrison had sent a text message to Officer Kevin Sloan. 4 words: "She shouldn't have moved." Sunita Krishnan read it twice. She looked at the dashcam transcript on the desk beside her, the one that Marisol Reyes had read aloud in the state capitol corridor 2 weeks earlier. The transcript that showed frame by documented frame that Tiana Booker's hands were visible and still at the moment of deployment. Tiana Booker never moved. Sunita Krishnan printed the text record. She printed the dashcam timestamp analysis beside it. She put them in a clear folder, walked down the corridor, and entered Marisol Reyes's office without knocking, because this was not a moment for knocking. Marisol Reyes was at her desk in a green blazer, reading a brief. Sunita Krishnan set the folder on the desk without a word and slid it across the surface until it stopped in front of the AG's hands. Marisol Reyes read it once, completely. Then she set it down flat on the desk and looked at it for a moment, the way you look at something that has just confirmed the worst and best things simultaneously. The worst, because it proved the cruelty was conscious and calculated and entirely without remorse, and the best, because it was documented, time-stamped, and inescapably his. She looked up at Sunita Krishnan. "We have everything," she said. The state capitol's main federal courthouse sat beneath a wide October sky, its stone facade catching the morning light the way only old buildings built to intimidate can. Every angle deliberate, every shadow a declaration of permanence. On the first day of the trial, the line of spectators stretched 2 full city blocks before sunrise. Camera crews from 11 networks had staked their positions along the marble steps. Inside, beneath the high natural skylights of Courtroom 4, every overhead fluorescent panel blazed at full strength, and the light fell on the proceedings with the unsparing clarity of something that refused to hide. This was not an accident. Judge Patricia Stoneham had personally requested the lighting be checked the night before. She was known for 3 things: her absolute command of a courtroom, her intolerance for theater that wasted the court's time, and the particular silence she could generate simply by removing her reading glasses and folding her hands. Marisol Reyes sat at the prosecution table in a forest green blazer over a white blouse and charcoal slacks, her legal pad open, her pen already moving. Beside her, Sunita Krishnan arranged a row of labeled folders with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been preparing for exactly this moment for months. Across the aisle, Clifford Raines smoothed his silver tie and leaned close to Dale Morrison, who sat in a dark navy suit, white shirt, hands flat on the table, in a posture that had clearly been practiced. Morrison's eyes moved only once, toward the gallery, before Raines put a hand on his forearm and said something short and firm. Morrison looked forward again, and did not look back. The jury filed in. 12 people settling into their seats like passengers on a flight they knew would be turbulent. Judge Stoneham called the room to order with a single tap of her gavel. She did not need to. Clifford Rains moved immediately to delay a procedural challenge to 2 bystander video exhibits he argued had compromised chain of custody. Judge Stoneham listened to exactly 90 seconds of his argument, reviewed the documentation Sunita Krishnan had pre-filed in anticipation of precisely this motion, and denied it. Rains tried again with a motion to suppress Dale Morrison's personnel file. Denied. He requested a sidebar to discuss jury composition. Denied. He was running the clock, and everyone in the room knew it, and Judge Stoneham cut each attempt with the clean efficiency of someone trimming dead wood. The trial would proceed. The first 3 days were built on physical truth. The dashcam footage from Morrison's patrol vehicle played in its entirety, 12 minutes and 43 seconds of a Tuesday afternoon in late August. The noon sun overhead, Route 9 bleached pale and flat in the frame. The jury watched Tiana Booker's silver CR-V come to a stop. They watched her window go down. They watched her raise both hands when she explained she was reaching for her registration. They watched the door come open. They watched her fall. No one in the courtroom made a sound through any of it. Marisol Reyes watched the jury watching the screen and let the footage do its work without a word. 3 bystander videos followed, each from a different angle, each capturing the same terrible geometry of a pregnant woman and a man with a taser, and an afternoon that should have been unremarkable. The hospital records came in through a medical records specialist who read Tiana Booker's admission stats into the record in a flat clinical voice that somehow made them worse. Taser-induced cardiac arrhythmia, fractured rib from impact with asphalt, fetal heart rate irregularities, consistent with maternal shock. Dr. Fatima Osei took the stand on day 2 in a white coat over a green blouse and navy slacks, and she testified with the precise, unhurried authority of someone who had spent that August night making decisions that stood between a baby girl and the alternative. Marisol Reyes asked her to describe in plain language what a taser deployment does to a 3rd trimester cardiovascular system. Dr. Osei described it without drama, which made it worse. She described the electrical disruption to the maternal heart rhythm, the cascade of stress hormones, the uterine contraction risk, the reduced placental blood flow. She used the word potentially fatal twice, and both times she said it, she looked not at the jury but straight ahead, the way someone speaks a fact they wish were not a fact. Clifford Rains cross-examined her for 2 hours and emerged with nothing. Day 3 ended with the dashcam audio. Marisol Reyes had saved it. The video had already run, but the audio, isolated, stripped of image, played through the courtroom speakers alone. Dale Morrison's voice, clipped, contemptuous, cutting Tiana Booker off mid-sentence. Then the sound of the door. Then the sound of the taser discharge. Then Tiana Booker's cry. Then the bystanders screaming. And then, threading through the chaos like something obscene, the sound of Dale Morrison's laugh. A short, low sound, casual, like something he had done 100 times before and found mildly satisfying. 4 jurors flinched. A woman in the second row pressed her hand flat to her sternum. The room went quiet after the recording ended, and Marisol Reyes let it stay quiet. "Nothing further on this exhibit," she said almost under her breath, and sat. Someone in the gallery exhaled the way you do when you've been holding a breath too long. Day 4 was for the numbers. Sunita Krishnan's experts, a forensic statistician from a state university and a former federal civil rights investigator, walked the jury through 7 years of Hargrove County use of force data. 84% of taser deployments against black residents, 14 complaints, 0 sustained. The 3-officer cluster, Conrad Tillman's signature on every cleared report. Clifford Rains came at the methodology with his own expert, who floated sampling bias and incomplete datasets. But Krishnan's team had filed counter-documentation in advance and worked through each objection in order. By the time Reyes's expert stepped down, he didn't look dishonest. He looked outmatched. On redirect, the statistician called the clearance rate a statistically impossible coincidence, and 2 jurors wrote something down. Dale Morrison took the stand that afternoon, and for 2 hours Reyes walked him through a polished version of the day. Morrison spoke about perceived threat and officer safety protocols. He said compliance 11 times. He said he had no way of knowing Tiana Booker was pregnant. He said he had followed procedure and stood by his decision. He was rehearsed, and the jury gave him nothing back. Then Reyes stood up. She walked to the stand without notes. She asked him a few preliminary questions about the day, the time, the location, the nature of the stop, and he answered each one in the same practiced register. Then she picked up a single printed page from the prosecution table, walked it over, and set it down in front of him without a word. "Officer Morrison, can you read that text message aloud for the court?" Morrison looked at his attorney. Reyes did not move. He looked down at the page. He read, more quietly than before. "She shouldn't have moved. That message was sent from your personal cell phone to Officer Kevin Sloan at 12:49 p.m. on August 22nd, 31 seconds after your taser was deployed. Correct?" "Yes, Officer Morrison." She took a step closer. "In your own dashcam footage, which this jury has watched in full, did Tiana Booker move?" The silence that came after wasn't accidental. It was the one the trial had been building toward. Morrison's mouth opened and closed. His jaw shifted a little to the left. He didn't answer. The gallery erupted. Judge Stoneham's gavel came down hard, fast. "This courtroom will come to order now." The room stilled. She looked at Morrison. He was still looking at his hands. Reyes waited a beat. Nothing further. Day 5 came in gray. Reyes delivered his closing for 62 minutes. He talked about split-second decisions and the burden officers carry, and the political motivations of an attorney general who had built her platform on exactly this kind of case. He was good. He gave the jury something coherent to hold on to. But when Reyes stood up, you could feel it shift, because she was the only person in the room who knew exactly where she was going. She stood in front of the jury in her green blazer. No notes, no podium. She spoke for 41 minutes about evidence and law and what had been allowed to calcify inside one county police department for 7 years, while 14 complaints went nowhere and 3 officers kept their jobs. She talked about firing a weapon at a woman whose hands were already up. She talked about a text sent 31 seconds after a pregnant woman hit the ground. She talked about the laugh in the empty afternoon. Then she stopped. Tiana Booker raised her hands. That should have been the end of the story. Instead, it was the beginning of ours. She held the jury's eyes a moment. Then she sat. Judge Stoneham read the instructions. The jury rose and filed out through the side door, and the door closed behind the last of them. The gallery stayed quiet. Reyes straightened her legal pad. Krishnan capped her pen. At the defense table, Morrison stared at the wall, and for the first time all week, Reyes had nothing to say to him. The clock above the bench read 4:19. Outside, light fell across the courthouse steps, and 200 miles south on Route 9, the asphalt was warm and ordinary, and cars went past the spot where a woman had gone down without slowing. The jury had been deliberating for 11 hours when Tiana Booker woke up on the morning of day 2 and felt something shift inside her that had nothing to do with the trial. It started as pressure, low and insistent, the kind that doesn't ask permission. She lay still in the gray morning light of her apartment bedroom for exactly 3 seconds, counting her breath the way Dr. Fatima Osei had taught her, before she understood completely what her body was telling her. She pressed her hand flat against her belly. Kezia pressed back. "Marcus." Her voice was steady, which surprised her. "Marcus, It's time. Marcus Booker was already sitting up before she finished the sentence. He had been a light sleeper since August. He had not slept deeply in months. He moved through the room in his orange coaching shirt and blue jeans, gathering her hospital bag with the practiced calm of a man who had rehearsed this moment in his head so many times it had become muscle memory, and whose hands were shaking anyway. He helped her to the car under a pale morning sky beginning to brighten at the edges, the kind of early autumn light that exists before the world is fully awake. Neither of them spoke much. Words had already done so much work. Sometimes silence is the more honest language. Dr. Fatima Ose met them in triage, already in her blue scrubs, her expression focused and warm in the way that a physician's face becomes when she has decided that everything will be all right and intends to make that decision real. She had delivered hundreds of babies. She had never forgotten this one was coming. She held Tiana Booker's wrist for a moment, not to check her pulse, just to hold it, and said, "We're ready for her." The delivery room was bright, under overhead fluorescent panels that poured clean white light onto every surface. There was nothing dim about that room. There was nothing dim about any part of what happened next. Tiana Booker labored for 3 hours in that light, Marcus Booker's hand in hers, and she was loud and precise and unashamed because she had survived things in the last months that made pain something she no longer needed to perform stoicism for. At 9:14 in the morning, Kezia Booker arrived in this world, small and furious and screaming with the kind of elemental outrage that newborns have and most adults have long since been persuaded to let go of. Tiana Booker held her daughter and wept into her hair. Not quietly, not with dignity maintained. She wept with her whole chest, with everything she had carried for months. The asphalt, the voltage, the waiting room, the viral video, the department's press statement, the sleepless nights wondering if this moment would ever come. She wept with grief, and she wept with joy, and the two feelings were so completely intertwined that they made one enormous, wordless human sound. Marcus Booker stood behind her, his hands on her shoulders, and cried without making a sound at all. Dr. Fatima Ose turned away briefly to give them the moment, and no one in that room missed the fact that she was blinking hard. Kezia Booker was healthy. She was small, yes. 3 weeks early had made her compact and urgent, like a letter that couldn't wait for the right envelope. But she was healthy. She breathed without assistance. She opened her eyes. At 2:37 in the afternoon of that same day, the jury returned its verdict. Marisol Reyes stood at the prosecution table in her green blazer, posture exact, face giving away nothing. Judge Patricia Stoneham sat at the bench, hands folded, watching the jury foreperson rise. Clifford Rains, in his expensive gray suit, had stopped his practiced calm 20 minutes ago and replaced it with something that looked uncomfortably like a man bracing for impact. The foreperson's voice was even. It carried in the silent courtroom the way only voices carrying history ever do. Dale Morrison, guilty, aggravated assault, guilty, reckless endangerment. Lieutenant Conrad Tillman, guilty, obstruction of justice, guilty, falsification of official records. The gallery did not erupt immediately. There was a single, suspended second, the way a deep breath holds before releasing, and then the room filled with sound. Sunita Krishnan reached across and pressed her hand briefly over Marisol Reyes's forearm. Marisol Reyes looked at the jury, and for the first time in 7 chapters of controlled, precise, strategic power, she allowed herself a single slow exhale that said everything. In room 412 of Hargrove General Hospital, Tiana Booker watched the screen mounted on the wall across from her bed. Kezia Booker was on her chest, wrapped in a white blanket printed with small yellow ducks, sleeping with the authority that only newborns and the very certain manage. Marcus Booker sat in the chair beside the bed, his hand over Tiana's, his blue jacket folded over the back of the chair behind him. When the verdict came through the television screen, Tiana Booker did not move. She pulled Kezia slightly closer. She pressed her lips to the top of her daughter's head. She said nothing for a long moment, and then she said, quietly, to no one in particular, and to everyone entirely, "Okay." Marcus Booker made a sound that was not a word. He brought Tiana's hand up and held it against his face, and closed his eyes. The verdict ran on every major news channel. Reverend Elijah Brantley, standing outside the courthouse steps in a blue jacket over a green shirt, spoke to a crowd of several hundred people who had gathered in the autumn afternoon light. He did not shout. He was a man who understood that some victories belong to a register quieter than rage. "Justice," he said, "does not always come, but today it came, and we remember that it required every single one of us to bring it here." The following week, before sentencing, Tiana Booker's written victim impact statement was read aloud in open court by Sunita Krishnan. Tiana Booker still recovering at home with Kezia. The statement ran 4 pages. It did not describe her suffering primarily, though the suffering was named with precision and clarity. What it described, primarily, was what Tiana Booker had intended her Tuesday afternoon to be. She was driving home. She was going to grade papers. She was going to eat the leftover soup Marcus had made the night before, the one with too much pepper that she had told him she loved anyway. She was going to talk to her daughter, already in the habit, already a mother, already practicing, about what the afternoon light looked like through a car window. The statement ended, "What happened to me on Route 9 was not inevitable. It was a choice someone made, and the response to it, the 4,000 people who marched, the Attorney General who knelt on hot asphalt and held my hand, the doctor who never stopped fighting, the students who carried my photograph. That was also a choice. I want my daughter to understand both. I want her to understand what people chose to do wrong and what people chose to do right. I want her to choose accordingly." Dale Morrison received 4 years. Lieutenant Conrad Tillman received 3. The courtroom was quiet when the sentences were delivered, a quietness that meant people were filing something away permanently. 3 days later, the governor of the state signed the Booker Use of Force Reform Act into law. The legislation, drafted by Marisol Reyes' office over months of evidence and testimony, mandated independent review of all Taser incidents statewide, required full public data transparency on use of force deployments, and established that any officer with 2 or more sustained complaints would face immediate suspension without pay pending investigation. The governor signed it at a desk in a sun-filled ceremonial room. Marisol Reyes standing to his right in her green blazer, Sunita Krishnan 2 steps behind. No one smiled for the cameras. They simply signed and witnessed and let the gravity of the room be what it was. Marisol Reyes visited Tiana Booker at home on a Thursday. She came alone, without staff, in the green blazer and khaki slacks that had become, without anyone planning it, part of the visual record of this story. Tiana was on the couch in a blue and green recovery gown, Kezia asleep against her collarbone. They talked for a while about ordinary things, food, rest, Marcus's inability to stop hovering. Then Marisol Reyes held Kezia Booker, carefully, the way people hold things they understand to be irreplaceable. She looked down at the sleeping face. She said quietly, "She's going to know this story." Tiana Booker looked at her daughter, then back at Marisol Reyes. "She already does." Route 9, on a bright and ordinary Tuesday afternoon not long after, looked the way it always had. Cars moved freely in both directions under an open sky. The asphalt was warm under an uncomplicated sun. Nothing marked the spot. Nothing needed to. The story had been told, and the people who needed to carry it forward were already carrying it. One of them small and new and furious and alive. You just heard a story that history tried to overlook. If it stayed with you, take a second to stand with it. Subscribe, share, and help us keep telling the stories that deserve light, not silence.